Hello and welcome everyone to Encounters Documentary Film Festival 2020. I am about to conduct a Q&A with Abul Ajak, who is the filmmaker for the short film Ruthan. My name is Julia Cain. I'm from the Center for Film and Media Studies at UCT, and I've been invited by Encounters to host the Q&A sessions for the 3 UCT films that have been selected for this year's festival. I'm just going to share my screen and introduce Abul first, and we have her poster. Abul Ajak is a South Sudanese documentary filmmaker currently pursuing her master's in documentary arts from the University of Cape Town. She was raised in Uganda and currently lives in Cape Town. After studying international relations and politics at the University of Dundee in Scotland, she decided to pursue film as she realized that it had become a way for understanding, or at least perceiving, different realities that stories can communicate. Her first film, Play for Peace, screened at the Amakula Film Festival at the Uganda Museum and Liftoff's first-time filmmaker sessions in London. Her second film, Ruthan, which is the film in this Encounters Festival, Ruthan is an Arabi Juba word meaning language, has so far screened at the Decolonial Film School in Cape Town, as well as the Liberation Doc Fest in Bangladesh, with more festival screenings to come. Both of Abul's films have centered on narratives of displacement. However, in her films, she emphasizes empowering narratives and aims to express perspectives that she believes are missing from discussions on the topics she chooses. So I'm now very pleased to start with Abul. It's lovely to be here with you.
Great to be here as well. Thank you, Julia.
Great. And I think let's start with the basics. Can you tell us about your film, Ruthan? Firstly, what is the film about?
Okay, so Ruthan is a film about the loss of language. So one of the things, it's quite a personal film. So I'm South Sudanese and I was raised in Uganda, and I grew up with my family. However, I lost my traditional language. I lost my mother tongue and I lost my father tongue growing up. I used to speak them when I was younger, my mother tongue, really well, and Swahili, but I lost them growing up as I was in school. And at school, I think a teacher told my mom that me and my sister weren't socializing enough with other children, so we needed to speak English. So we kind of took on English more and forgot our languages in the process, which is really sad. However, I do live with my grandmothers. We still communicate on a daily basis. We find different ways to communicate. So the film kind of shows how we attempt to communicate. Like it's not full communication, but it's also based on how we find, like I try to base my film as a moment in time, because I feel that language is something that changes all the time. Language is quite tenuous, so we don't know if the languages we speak now are the same languages spoken like say 500 years ago. So I'm trying to kind of show how I'm just part of this movement. Like there is a great loss. I think languages are being lost at an unprecedented rate in this century. However, there's also like changes happening within languages, different languages. Like I think some cultures connect and create new languages. Some cultures kind of separate and create different languages in that process. Yeah. So it kind of looks at that. Yeah. Sorry, is that my... Oh, my emails are going off. Let me put them on silent.
That's fine.
Yeah.
The pitfalls of Zoom.
Exactly. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as you've described, your film is about linguicide. That's your topic, but it's also very much, in terms of its form, a personal documentary. And it's quite, when I was getting ready for these Q&As, it was quite striking to me, even last year when these films were being made, that 3 of the UCT films selected for Encounters 2020 are personal documentaries. And in fact, this year's selection, all of the films are also made by women. Can you speak a little bit about why you chose to address your subject of linguicide in such a personal way? What was your thinking behind your choices?
I think I think that the personal can be quite political. Like, I think it's very hard to realize that when, we kind of want to deal with personal issues as this and political issues as that. But I feel like the fact that I lost my language, there was a lot of cultural politics involved, so obviously being part of, the colonized people of the world, we need to, like, everyone in the world kind of speaks the colonial languages. Those are the main languages that are spoken in the world, except maybe a few countries that have managed to preserve their heritage. And this language loss, I think I have kind of confronted it in different ways. How language is such a strong basis of how you are treated, of how you are, how you're allowed to engage, of access. Sometimes it can kind of give you access or deny you access to certain spaces. So like when I'm at home, for example, I don't feel as confident in my culture simply because I lost my language, and that's, a really huge loss for me. However, I still feel like I'm very much accepted at home. Like, I'm very much accepted by the people who love me, but there's still that loss. Yeah, so I don't know. I think I chose to tell that story in a personal way because I do believe that the personal is quite political. Like, in discussions of a lot of people who have watched my film, people from the African continent, people who have lost their languages, people from different like cultures, people from Zimbabwe or Kenya, all these places, it's always like, yeah, this is something that I've been too embarrassed to talk about, but it's something that I know I don't speak my language. Usually it's never, it's not something that I have to confront because I'm always in spaces where English is the main language spoken. However, it is a loss that, quite a few people I know have kind of contended with. And it's like, because even in terms of the statistics, I think we'll be losing 50% of languages. That's a very large amount of languages to be losing. So yeah, it's just kind of realizing that I'm part of that extermination of languages. That is the reason I chose to make it a personal story, and also kind of show how that, I don't know, I think personal is like, it being personal also makes it quite relatable to people like me. Yeah, people who have lost their languages. Yeah. Yeah, so that's why I went with that choice.
Okay, absolutely. And you have a beautiful quotation at the end of your film. I'll read it, that sort of speaks, I think, to bringing in that personal aspect. You say, you talk about what you've noticed that is so interesting about communication. And you say, it transcends words and language, and the true understanding that comes from intimacy has not been lost on me. So I think that speaks very beautifully to your connection to your grandmothers, despite, as you speak about through your film, this disjuncture with not being able to fully communicate through language.
Mm. Yeah, I think also in terms of like the discussions about language, there's so many discussions that come about. One of which that really helped me with my film as well, because I did a lot of academic research when I was doing my film, was that I did a lot of research on linguicide and epistemicide. So epistemicide is basically the way in which we lose a school of thought, like, or a form of knowledge. So like a lot of knowledge is lost by the loss of language, and linguicide is the loss of a language, like the death of a language. So I just wanted to pay particular attention to those losses of language. And one of the things that came up in my research quite a bit is that we also, us being in this kind of colonized framework, we elevate certain forms of communication, textual forms of communication, above other forms of communication. So it's always written communication and language. Those are the most elevated forms of communication. However, there's still these underlying little forms of communication that you can have without necessarily speaking to someone. So I really wanted to elevate that quite a bit, and I hope I did. I think I did.
I think you did. You did. Yes. And I think that leads nicely into my next question, which was about that I really enjoyed your inclusion of the oral story that you use to open your film. And then you used a really interesting simple animation technique. And I can just share my screen and to just share an image here. And yeah, so I mean, it worked, I thought, really beautifully as the introduction to your film. Could you share with us how you came to include both the story and the animation?
So when it came to the story, in the first place, so I was interviewing my paternal grandmother, Monga Met, and she's told me this story quite a few times. I've had this story in school. Actually, the first time I had this story was in primary school. I was in school and they were like, you know, there's this story about how different cultures split up. Because in Ugandan educational system, we were learning about different cultures and their creation stories. So this is where I first learned this story. A few years later, we were like having, you know, I have a really huge family and my grandmother is an amazing storyteller. And we were sitting around and then she starts telling this story and I was like, oh my God, I had this story in school. It's the same story. Oh, wow, great. And, you know, when I speak to other Luo people, because I do meet a lot of Luo people as were settled in East Africa and Kenya and Uganda, they'll have their own version of the story. And while I was shooting this film, my grandmother did narrate the story to me one more time. She's like, yeah, this is our roots, this is our foundation, this is where we came from. And I had that footage, I had that voiceover. She told the story in Cholo, so obviously I had my auntie and my uncle translating for me because I couldn't understand, like, you know, when we speak too much, I feel like I could understand just specific words. So I did have them communicate to me. So, I mean, help me translate the film. Yeah, so I did have that story and I was like, oh, how do I use this? How do I use this? I know I wanted to use it. It's something that I was really debating about as well, because it took me a while after making the film before editing it, because I was thinking through it a lot. And we were in a class session, UCT, at the studio, and one of my classmates, Takira, she's a great filmmaker as well, she suggested that I use stop motion, and I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So she and Annie came over one of the days to my house. I painted the images before, and they came over and they guided me through it. So it's a really collaborative process, and I feel like my class and the staff at UCT has really been really helpful, you know. So yeah, we did have moments where we just came into my house, we sat down like literally right there, and we recorded it, like, yeah, and yeah, so that was really helpful. Like, I think the process of feedback was quite helpful in forming my movie. I'm forming my film and like telling the story the way that I did. Yeah, having my classmates and having a lot of people tell me, you know, what to include, what not to include was quite helpful. Yeah.
Okay. I just want to dig a little bit further. Well, we're going to get a little bit more to your process as our just after this. But while we've still been on it, can you expand a bit further on your thinking about how you placed your topic within the social world of South Sudan and Uganda, with regards to the rest of the film as well? You know, that inclusion, you know, we've been talking about it a bit already. You've been talking about it, the political and the personal. So we've got, you know, that South Sudan and Ugandan physical social space, and as well as your grandmother's. Can you speak a little bit, and your personal voice, which we haven't maybe spoken about as much yet? You narrate very beautifully through the film. Can you speak a bit more about this?
Oh, thank you. I think maybe let me even go back to the original point of the film in the first place. That will kind of help me explain it more and how I came to this story. So I think the first process was kind of talking about the film. So initially I wanted to film my great grandfather. He's a very old man, 106 years old, still alive. And there's a lot of great stories about him from my mom. She's like, oh, he's a warrior, he's known for this. And I was like, oh, that is so interesting. And, you know, being South Sudanese, we're very much connected to our ancestry. Like, we can recite our ancestry down to like so many generations, you know. Like, I think I know stories about my great grandfathers and all these things that they are told to us quite often. So we feel connected to them still. So I definitely wanted to tell the story about my great grandfather, but I was very interested in the fact that he's a very, very old man, and he's definitely seen a lot. He's seen a lot of conflict in South Sudan, but he's also lived in South Sudan at a time before it was ever like changed by colonialism, and he's alive now. So the question, like, the thing that was in my head the most was that, how do I tell this story about, this space and this gap between like our tradition and the world as it is now? How do I kind of bridge that gap, or try to just kind of create understanding through these different things? And right before this, I also had a conversation with Liani before I traveled back home, because it was after the first semester I traveled back home. I shot it during my during the winter break. So I had a conversation with her, and she was telling me about how like about culture, like, and we question culture quite a bit. It's like, who decides what stays, who decides what leaves, and like, where do these decisions come from? Like, this is like it was a very interesting thing that I wanted to look at quite a bit. And yeah, going back home, I realized I couldn't go to South Sudan. My grandfather lives in South Sudan. My great grandfather lives in South Sudan. I couldn't go to South Sudan, and I decided to shoot my grandmothers. And I'm very happy that I did shoot them, because it meant that I get to stay with them for a bit, and they were cooking for me and just being amazing the whole time. But another thing that came out quite a bit was, obviously, I'm a victim of displacement. I wouldn't call myself a refugee per se, but I've never been able to live in my country based on that. And my grandmothers as well had to move. And, when I thought of the oral story also talks about a conflict that divided and separated a whole tribe. It was like, the Luo were essentially one tribe before this conflict made them, I think they're over like 16 Luo tribes. I'm not sure the number, but there's, a very large number of Luo tribes at the moment. And I just realized that, okay, so the world is changing as we're living through changes. We're living through changes that we can't recognize, because we're trying to kind of, deal with the world as it is. We're just trying to exist or survive. So I kind of saw that as a way for us to recognize, because one of the issues that's also quite prevalent in my country is tribalism. So I was just like, but there's a way that, we are one tribe today, but maybe 10 years down the line we'll be like a different tribe because of some, conflict factors, or some kind of factors that, will create some sort of mix and match of cultures. So, our identity is quite strong, but our identity also changes. So if this is an issue that people fight about, it really makes no sense, because this is something that has changed so many times in the past and will possibly change a lot in the future. So yeah, it's just kind of noticing that there's this essential difference. Like, I don't know, we kind of exist thinking of ourselves as this very fixed identity, which I don't think we are at all. Like, our identities are very tenuous. So obviously I lived in Uganda. I'm very Ugandan. I will say my first language is Ugandan English, for example. So it's like, it's those kinds of things that I think just speak to how we are defined by these factors, but not entirely. Like, we're changing in the process. Like, we're existing through change. Yeah. And also we're in a pandemic, so that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you touched on it already. I think important contributors, Leonie Mostor from UCT, who convenes the Masters of Documentary Arts, as well as, I know you come from a particularly great class where there was a lot of collaboration with fellow classmates. Can you speak a little bit more about your process of making the film and how it developed?
So the development, I did speak about, wanting to make the film about my grandfather in the beginning.
Yes.
And then deciding, because of like the limitations, but also, it was also my grandmothers are a great representation of my culture, because we lived with them. I learned a lot about my country through them. So yes, I shot the film in Uganda. So like, I wasn't with my classmates. I couldn't get anyone to come help me out with the sound, or to come help me out with cinematography. I had to do a lot of that entirely on my own. So I did shoot it. I came back for my second semester, and I think one of the crazy things with filmmaking process I've realized in a lot of my films is that there's a lot of serendipity sometimes. So I did a visual anthropology module last sem, and I was speaking to my lecturer about this film, and I was just trying to explain to her what I was trying to do, and she's like, "Oh, you must research epistemicide." That's like, and I didn't know what epistemicide was, and that's like the loss of knowledge. And I started researching it, and I found so much information that I think was really helpful to my film. So I kept researching, I kept researching, I kept researching. So before I started editing my film, a lot of what I did was academic research based on like these topics of like epistemicide and linguicide. And based on that, I could like select my scenes. And I was quite adamant about, having my film and telling my story the way I wanted to tell it. In the beginning, I had like a lot of visual metaphors that I don't know if people understood. So I kind of was very experimental and was throwing in a lot of things that I thought were interesting. But that's when the feedback kind of becomes really important. So feedback, where obviously Julia, you were there, and Leonie was there. A lot of my class was there. So that was like my first feedback session. So I had the class feedback, and they helped me quite a lot. There was a lot of things that I was doing that they were like, yeah, you don't want people to think too much about your film, because I was putting these metaphors that could have been maybe too hard to like understand for someone who's not in my head, I guess. So they were like, yeah, you must definitely try to make it easier for us to understand. Another really good bit of feedback I got was maybe I shouldn't over explain my film too much, because I had a voiceover. It was very heavy voiceover based. So they're like, yeah, you definitely shouldn't explain your film so much. And outside of UCT as well, I think it was really great having like my class help me out a lot. But we also attended, I think, the editor Khalid Shames edited the Lost Local online editing session. So we used to attend that at the Chimurenga workshop every Thursdays. It was Thursdays. It wasn't every Thursday, but he hosted them quite regularly. There were 8 sessions, and he asked the class to kind of give films that he could help us edit through. And I gave him my film, and we watched it as the Chimurenga class, the Lost Local class, and they also gave me more feedback. So I found the feedback process really, really helpful, because I have this idea of my films in my head, and I'm very happy to kind of throw them out and put something together. But the moment other people kind of tell you like, we don't get this as much, you don't get that as much, it kind of helps you kind of create a really nice story in the end, like a story that could be understood by everyone. So yeah, I'm really happy to have feedback. I think it's very important to get feedback, like as much feedback as possible. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, it's wonderful to be sort of creating these new communities with young African and South African filmmakers, because it is so important, that feedback and collaboration and inspiration and stimulation.
Exactly. Like, I think working with the class was really great, because we all had our films. Like every single one of us was working on a project as well. So it's like, would all try to help each other as much as we could. And I think they're really strong filmmakers. I was really, I think a lot came out of that process. And I remember we were talking about this after we had our screening, our end of year class screening, how after making a film for so long, kind of it being the thing that you're obsessed with for like this couple of months, that was the first time that we were able to sit down and actually watch the film and take in all the emotions and maybe really laugh genuinely at all the scenes that were actually funny. But the whole time through the classes, we were just like, oh, we have to make this film. That's not, like change that. But in the end, like we could sit down together and really enjoy what we had made. So that was really great. Yeah.
Great. And Abul, just to close off, what are you working on now?
So I'm working on my final film. So my final film, my final film is my final UCT film. That's like the film that I will be graduating with. Coming to South Africa, I definitely wanted to tell a story about this country, and I had a lot of ideas. But living here, I think one of the things that I experience the most, which I find quite jarring, is gender-based violence. However, there's so much to talk about within this one particular issue. So I am making a collaborative participatory film with like a lot of women in South Africa. I put out a call for participants, and a lot of people kind of agreed to participate, and they will be shooting themselves with specific questions that I've asked them. So I'm waiting for responses. I'm waiting to see how that works out. And I'm also working with I'm working on a couple of short projects with the Cape Town Together Network. I'm making a short film with a couple of short films through that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your behind the scenes ideas and thoughts about the film. And for anyone who's watching who hasn't seen it, I really encourage you to watch Ruthan. Thanks so much, Abul. You are a filmmaker to watch going forward in the future, and we look forward to watching your career develop. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Julia. And thanks to UCT for helping me, get these ideas and put them together, giving me the space to really develop these ideas. It's really great. Yeah. Thank you.